I made an associate partner, I think, after 6.5 years. But I had to learn myself quite a lot of things, starting with the networking and, kind of trying to identify the mentors, the sponsors, and just generally learning the British culture, the corporate culture, because I'm the first person who's working in my family, and also just getting myself within the UK established in any shape or form. I think specifically with the personal brand, it would be very good to kind of hear your questions and kind of what do you think would be helpful. And I don't know, you can raise your hand or maybe you can just put in the chat. I can't see the chat, so Andrea, I'll be
okay, no
I'll be asking you because I just see a little thing. I think in terms of the personal brand, what I always believed helped me progress fast is the opportunity to show the knowledge I have and kind of the type of work which I do. So to give you an idea, the first 3 years were very difficult for me. I couldn't get promoted 3 times. I finally got promoted on the 3rd time. And I think that the main difference when I couldn't find a job and when I couldn't get promoted is that I couldn't tell my story. I couldn't tell what I've done. I couldn't really tell it in a way which is of relevance to the audience who's listening to this. And fundamentally, it was not something which I had anyone to teach me, but as I figured out later on, it's always very important to be able not only to do the job, but to also tell about the work you've done and the impact you've made both internally in the company and perhaps externally as well. I have been doing...
So we have a couple of comments. One from Nikki that's saying she still hasn't sussed out the English culture.
Yes.
So I think that there's quite a challenge for people. But AJ has said, can you share examples or an example of people who have been successfully used personal branding to advance their careers in tech that doesn't identify as a man?
Yeah, so the thing is, I don't actually know many people with a personal brand in tech right now, whether they are men or women, outside of the people that you read about online and kind of the bigger names, perhaps. What I have found is within the corporates, and I largely worked in corporates, in many of the cases, you have a pushback from the marketing and perhaps from the senior leaders as well, in terms of whether you should be speaking externally or you should not be speaking externally, and how much of the tape within the company you need to go through so that you go and speak externally, if it's externally. So one of the experiences I've had is, for example, what really helped me is I was asked by my boss in the past company to work with the marketing to tell the stories of the technology which the company was doing. And obviously because I learned so much around, all the successful stories, I also had to tell them in an engaging way to the external audience. Those were not necessarily my stories. Those were the stories of the projects, the stories of the successes. But I think what I found is an opportunity to learn how to take the content, which is very, very technical, and say it in a simple language to the other people who may not be so technical, and keep them engaged rather than doing something very standard, which some of the corporates do. I think in terms of the personal brand, what I see quite a lot right now is you have a lot of CEOs talking on television, or kind of somebody really very senior. I have seen in my past company the managing partners who do this, and it's part of their job. What I'm encouraging from the company perspective is to make sure, because you want to be more diverse and the audience outside is diverse as well, that you don't only focus on the CEOs or the senior managing partners or partners, but you give opportunities to the more junior resources, to the middle management to rise and shine. I think on the example of the personal brand, there is actually somebody I have remembered. So his name is David. I need to remember his surname, but he was very, very popular in my previous company. And his story was more, he came from the social poor, like from the working class, and he started an apprenticeship within the KPMG. So there wasn't anything particularly special at the time. But there was an opportunity that he was invited to meet the Queen when KPMG was meeting the Queen, because they wanted to show the diverse stories and the successes. But what he's done after that meeting, he has started his own podcast, and it was around development with David. So he interviews the various people. Some of them have been less known, but now he's interviewing kind of more and more known people in the space. They're not purely technology, they're more the business people. There may be people with a different story. But he managed to grow his podcast from, I think, 1,500 downloads to over 1 million downloads since 2021. And I believe his podcast is more successful than the podcast of the CEO and chairwoman of the company. So I think a lot of people are kind of checking it out. I don't quite know how he manages to combine it with a career, because I think he's trying to do it more from the social mobility perspective. And he's a champion for social mobility within the KPMG. And I know that there are a few groups there who support this agenda. It's not directly technology, but I've been very impressed that, you know, he's been doing it in his free time, and it has reached a lot of people, and he's having success in that. Shall we go through questions? Because
yeah. So Brima is saying, how do we differentiate personal brand from that of business? Because brand in general means more than one item, logo, expertise, etc.
Yeah, so I think the way I think about it is, obviously there is an expertise you have and perhaps the story behind it, but more importantly, it's the impact that you make on the others. So for example, if you're a consultancy and you have a brand, you would be known for serving your clients in a particular way, in a particular space, or in technology space, for example. But when you are a personal brand, in a way, you are known for the fact that you are not just a person of the company, but you have your own ideas, thoughts, and impact that you are making on the community. I think what I found difficult with the large corporates is that there are very few people that I can name per company that I clearly remember who they are and what they do and kind of their story. In many cases, as I mentioned, is, you know, you would probably get a lot of more stories of the CEOs, and from my experience, the marketing team are writing it instead of them personally. But I do encourage, and I do think that the companies need to tell the stories of kind of the younger people and middle management, and not just the senior people. Did that answer the question?
So, I can't answer that. Yes, Brian's saying yes. So Joe has a question for you. As a woman, it can feel like we have to do so much extra to be recognised for our expertise. Do you think men have to think about their personal brands too?
I personally think everybody needs to think about the personal brand, but my experience has been I only work with men most of the time, and my experience has been that there were instances when I'm a little bit shut down when I want to say what I think or what I believe I would like to say. So I don't like those situations. I think I haven't seen, like, outside of David right now, I can't think of a direct person who's a guy who's doing this, but obviously you have a brand within the company. So we had, in my past job, we had obviously the CEO, and kind of there was a lot of media, both internally and externally, around his journey, and obviously the employees read around it. But what I do know is the marketing team has come to me and they said they want him to be LinkedIn top voice. They want the chairman to be LinkedIn top voice. And I said, I want to be LinkedIn top voice. And then I became LinkedIn top voice, and they didn't, even though they have marketing who's writing all the content for them. So I think, I mean, to answer the question, I do think that you can do it, but in my case, it's taking me a substantial amount of time, which I'm doing in my own free time, on my own wish, during my weekends and holidays and evenings, because I believe in it. I think in many of the cases, people already are very tired of their job and they kind of want to do something else in their free time. But I do think it helps when you have it. In my case, as a minimum, it helps me get the network outside of the company. And specifically because I do client-related work and part of my consulting job is to sell the business, it gives me access to the people to who I wouldn't have met normally. So I'm kind of driving the new pipeline into the company, which then the company finds helpful. It allows me to kind of bring the context which my peers don't have and kind of to introduce them to the contacts or to the opportunities. I think that was the most helpful part from the business perspective.
Okay, thank you. And Joe has a follow-on, which is there any advice you'd give specifically to women about building a personal brand?
Yeah, so I think it's a long answer, but in principle, I think everybody fundamentally needs to think, what is the irresistible offer, or what is it that they stand for, which makes them different from the others? Because, for example, in consulting world, there are lots of consultants. There are thousands of consultants. I think that there are hundreds of thousands of consultants probably globally. So the question is, what is it that makes you unique, different, and relatable? So for example, in my case, it's more like I'm from working class, I'm a woman in tech, I have a disability, and I'm an introvert. So I think the audiences with who I connect more naturally are those types of audiences from the personal empathy perspective. I think if it's more on the expertise, I think, I mean, actually, I remember the one person who's a guy who is well known. His name is David Knott, and he keeps writing around cloud and DevOps. Every week he publishes his blog, and he tells me that he likes doing it because it just makes him do something else outside of his job and his family, and it keeps him up to speed in terms of having other hobbies and interests. But a lot of people read his blog and a lot of people reach out to him as well. But I guess in terms of the personal brand, so something which I have been doing is trying to identify what is it that makes the person unique, or what is it they have to say, or maybe they want to say something differently from what the masses of people are saying. So that's kind of number one. Another thing is making sure that your message is heard. Now, this part is the most difficult for me because in most of the cases, the company doesn't necessarily champion you from the PR perspective to like go on television or go to be featured in the media, because it's not technically the job spec of a person, at least in my position or my previous positions. So in many of the cases, I've been very proactive and tenacious in terms of making sure that I reach out myself to the conferences or to the speaking events. My personal story was more that I won the Tech Women 100 Award, which was in 2020, I think. And I was invited to do a talk in Russia, which was to 130,000 people. And I've never done speaking before. And they said you need to do like a TEDx talk in like a very engaging way, and you have 1 week to prepare for it. So I have written a talk, which was good, but because I haven't spoken and I haven't practiced speaking, and it was in Russian, which I haven't spoken for a few years at the time, I found it very, very difficult. So I tried asking for help. So I asked the partners in my job so that they can read it and give me some feedback. I asked people in that case who could speak Russian so they could sort of listen to what I have to say. I also asked Miss Russia, who I happened to know at the time, to prepare me for the talk, because there are very few women that have to give a talk after they won an award. And apparently Miss Russias do this. After they win the award, they need to give a lot of talks so that she can tell me what to wear and roughly how I can feel about it. But I didn't have a public speaking coach. I didn't have a public speaking person at the time, and I didn't have access to them. So I kind of had to amalgamate what I could within the 1 week that I had. So I managed to do it, but I was very excited about the story, but I was very disconfident in terms of the talking part. And I think what happened is my slot moved around. So I wasn't talking at the prepared time slot. I was talking before. So it kind of moved the whole flow of what I was meant to say and what I thought I'm going to say. So that was very awkward and difficult, but I think people applauded, so they liked it, which was nice. But what I did after is I made a commitment that I want to study how to speak so that I feel much more confident. Historically, I was in an all technology team, which was advanced analytics. So none of us really talk that much. So I was taking courses from, I actually asked my boss to pay for some public speaking courses, but he has unfortunately refused my request. He said it's too expensive and he doesn't want to spend the budget on contacts on my public speaking. So I went and I found a person in Russia, which was much, much more cheaper economically, for which I could pay. I found somebody in UK, but that was, to be frank, much more expensive. And I sort of practiced whatever the exercises they gave me. So the most simple exercise which they gave me is to record myself and to listen to myself and to look at myself and to be comfortable with how I think I look and how I think I speak. The thing which helped is there was a bit of a support group. So they created a WhatsApp group of a few people that were also studying public speaking. And those people were not meant to say anything negative. They were meant to give constructive feedback and kind of say, this is good and you can do this, but not to say everything is horrible and you need to change it. So I've been doing it maybe for a month, but realistically you should be doing for a longer time, depending on how you've been progressing within, the speaking thing. And then I figured out that now I've studied how to speak, nobody is listening to me because nobody wants to invite me anywhere. So I decided to do a TED Talk because I thought it's impossible for me to get a TEDx talk. So I applied to every single TEDx talk. The thing which was important there was to pitch what you have to say and to make yourself different from anyone else who applies to do a TEDx talk. Because apparently there are very many people who apply to do TEDx talks, and many people are invited by the TEDx organizers from the set of people who they know, or perhaps the more known people than myself at that point in time. I guess it took a lot of tenaciousness. So I wrote a lot of applications. I did various exercises which they asked me to do, like video pitching or written, questions. But in the end, nobody wanted to work with me on that TEDx. So I kept applying, I think, for about 6 months or so. And finally, I got on a TEDx, which was a successful TEDx in the end. I guess I started asking the conferences if I can speak in them, but I got a resistance from my company because they said, you're not senior enough and you're not approved by one of the 16 spokespeople by our CEO. So I asked the partner in my advanced analytics to talk to the marketing, and they did tell him the same thing. They said, even if you're a partner and you want her to speak, we have a very specific set of like 16 people who can do the talking. And then the partner, because he was head of analytics, he actually was not keen on speaking himself. So he said, okay, she can do the talking and we don't have anyone else who wants to do this or who may be good in this. And his whole concept was people will listen more to a younger woman than a middle-aged guy. So he kind of was pushing, but I never got an agreement from marketing that they will ever promote me in terms of, asking me to speak. I think then what happened is I got an email actually about being on television for ITV. And I said I want to be on ITV. But the response I got is my job is to organize other people, not to be on TV myself. So I was very disappointed about it. So I didn't get on ITV. And then I guess I just started reaching out to people myself in terms of podcasts and conferences. I got to do an interview with the guy who's the CEO of Thought Machine. And there was a senior writer from Financial Times. So we spoke about cloud, which was my expertise. And that was helpful because what I didn't do, I didn't ask KPMG for approval. I kind of through the formal way. So I spoke to the partner, I said, I'm going to do it. I spoke to some other partner who knew the CEO to kind of figure out what the CEO is like. And then nobody really told me off after I've done this exercise. So I carried on doing my cloud talks at the time. So that was sort of successful, but I think I started putting it on LinkedIn, and then more people started coming to me to do talks at that time around cloud, and then it moved into data and into other topics. I think.
So Alina, I think that's a good example of sometimes don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness.
Yes.
But I think one of the things that I had in a previous company was that I wasn't allowed to talk because of the brand that I was working for. They didn't want anyone to talk, and it was, it was very hard for anyone to talk. Didn't matter what level you were at. But actually, this is where I found saying that I actually ended up talking under the BCSWomen banner and talking about what I wanted to talk about through BCSWomen, and that, and like you, I'm also a natural introvert, so it was pushing myself to do things that then helped me in my actual job to be able to do. So sometimes you've got to find ways around these things.
I mean, something which I found as a way originally is nobody was criticizing me for a personal story, so I could go around all the podcasts and talk around how to be a woman in technology, or kind of my story. So I don't think I need to ask for permission to talk about my life story. With the cloud one, I think in theory I should have needed a permission, but I kind of didn't ask. I think what I started doing after is when I came to the next job, they still, even though they kind of promoted me a bit more, but I never had the PR who's going to pitch me to conferences and magazines. But I think I kept engaging with the previous conferences in which I used to speak. And then I started getting a lot of broader topics. So I started pivoting from the cloud to, because my role became broader, to talk about data and ops resilience and other topics. So I think what it enabled me to do is I would always do my own research on the topic. I try to engage the researcher in that company so that at least he gives me the reports of like Gartner or something which gets more stats. But I used to do a lot of research, both in terms of questions, which I would ask as a moderator, or in terms of the content which I'm going to talk to if I'm speaking before the events. But I think what I've done more is going broader on the topics so that people don't just pigeonhole me into cloud specifically, because in that company, we were not selling that much cloud at the time. But so I can talk to something broader, like financial services leaders, what do they think about in technology, or maybe CIOs, what they think about on technology. I carried on putting it on LinkedIn, so I think it did give me more opportunities to do the speaking, which was helpful. I think at that point, the challenge I had is that my company wasn't quite understanding, am I doing this in my own time, or am I doing this in the time which I'm meant to be working? So there was a bit of misunderstanding. Obviously, I say I'm Alina and I'm Oliver Wyman, but some people think that I'm doing it in my Oliver Wyman time, whereas I've been doing it in my personal time. So I used to do it I would take a vacation on the day that I speak, or I would pre-record if it's like a podcast or something. But I think the advice here is if you are doing all this public speaking or external thing, I guess you need to agree with the company. How do they perceive it? Because I thought it's very clear that I'm doing it in my own time because I'm not charging them for any time. But I think there was a conflict because I put it on LinkedIn and kind of people don't understand when I'm doing it. And as you know now, you can schedule it on LinkedIn when it comes out. And at the time, I used to have an offshore person that would put it at a particular point in time. So I kind of had to, well, in a way, I had to explain that I'm doing it in my own time. Or if they wanted me to do it in their time, then they need to pitch me ideally. I think the next level
before you go on, Deli's had as a comment really, but it's, listening to you, Alina, it would seem it would be easier for individuals who are self-employed to personal brands, what would your advice be to set, of people who are self-employed?
Well, I think, see, what,
Because you're at that stage now, as opposed to being
yeah,
part of a large organization.
yeah, but I think at the stage where I am now, I actually have a lot of companies that reach out to me for work who want to build their brand in the back of my brand. So for example, they may be the companies where they are doing technology, but nobody knows about them, or they may be the companies that are building the consulting branch, and consulting wasn't a big thing for them. So I do see that corporates now value it after I have spent a substantial amount of time building it, but they perhaps didn't support from the start to the part where we got to so far. I think as a self-employed, I mean, it can be different, right? You could hire a PR agent who's going to pitch you everywhere. And the challenge I've seen with PRs, people with who I am acquainted, that there are very few PRs specifically in the tech space. What I found helpful is I more recently asked a person to just introduce me to various people who they know in kind of more media journalist way, which is not a typical way how PR works. But I would just talk to all of them myself, and I will pitch myself and discuss all my ideas with them. But essentially all I want is them to say on LinkedIn, hey, it's Alina, maybe Alina can talk to you because Alina does these, things, or she's interested in doing this. So I think if you don't necessarily need PR, I was studying separately how to be on television, and I think that the advice they give is you need to think about people in your network, and then think of the people in your network who may know the other people, and then you write to those people, you rate them as those who are kind of your closer, I don't know, like contacts or friends or colleagues who may be willing to introduce you, and then obviously understand what is their relationship. Because what they were saying is you could have a brother-in-law who may know a producer on BBC, right? But you kind of need to think about it yourself. What I'm doing now, because I have quite a good LinkedIn now, is frankly speaking, when I reach to people, nobody says, no, I don't want to talk to you. So I think it's just more the question, how do you reach it at that stage? What I used to do, whether I was self-employed or in the company, I used to reach out to people, in particular in the start, and I used to say, I'm Alina, I would like to speak on these topics. And it used to be a very bad ratio of response, but it has significantly improved over the period of time. I mean, ideally, if the company can, if it's a larger company, and I know we're going to get to the self-employed in a moment, but if it's a larger company, if they would like to pitch for you, that would be ideal, because what I've seen in my ex-company is we had PR pitching for the senior partners. However, the experience I've had is, for example, we applied to Money 2020, which is a large conference in open banking space and fintech space. And I did my own application, and marketing did application for senior partners. And it was like an open application, which anybody can do to apply. So the only person who got chosen was me and none of those senior partners. And then they kind of came to me and said, how come I managed to get on the conference and they didn't? So they kind of had to pay a ticket to watch me speak at that conference, which was funny. So I think that there are always ways. I think with the self-employed, I've seen that there are some agencies who help you build your brand, which is they say, what is your key message? What is your key story? They even help you do like, here are the key branding advice in terms of colors, logos, and everything else. And then I think it's a separate person who is more a PR person who can potentially pitch you. As I said, I have done a lot of it myself since I've become self-employed because I'm trying to be more efficient in time. I was trying to review different PR agencies, but I haven't yet found a person who I think is really good in technology space and has the relationships.
Okay.
Maybe Andy has it, but Andy doesn't want to do my personal brand, unfortunately.
Okay. So Bianca says she can strongly relate to some parts of your story. I strongly believe that she needs a personal brand, as she's all over the place. I believe I have a story. She has a story to tell, but I don't know where to start. Is there a course or resources you would advise so that I can develop on what makes me unique?
Yeah, so I think that there are some courses around the personal brand. I guess the question, if it's English speaking, so there is one lady, she does, I think the organization is called Black Tech Women. I forget her name, but she was the most influential woman by Computer Weekly a couple of years ago, or 3 years ago. And she has a course which you can buy, I think, for £140 or £150, which are short videos. I haven't personally watched it, but I know that's the course which exists, and I guess she's more closer to technology. I've spoken to her in terms of how she built the brand, and she was saying it's essentially telling your story to as many people as you can, and then it's a bit of a funnel, and then fundamentally maybe nobody listens to you the first time, but the more you tell the same story or series of stories, the more audience you are going to reach. And then obviously she was trying to say that when she first came, nobody knew about her, so she was kind of going and figuring out through the network who to talk to. It's kind of in a way similar to selling the business in a way. Obviously, this is a little bit different. It's a personal brand. But if your personal brand is attached to your personal business, if you're self-employed or kind of a smaller company, it's kind of the same process of like pitching the brand or pitching the store or pitching the product or pitching whatever it is. Sorry, Andrea, was there another question that I didn't answer?
Yeah, the next question is, well, it's more of a statement really from Nikki that says, sorry, it's just flipped by. I suppose the question that we should be asking is, for what purpose do I want to build my brand, as that will influence the direction taken. So,
yeah, so I think that was another course which I can recommend. So there is a lady, her name is Dory Clark, and she's more US based. She's not in technology space. She is more broader. So her background is she's been a writer, or like she wanted to be more of a writer. She's not in the tech space, but she has been featured in various places like Harvard Business Review. She's been a contributor to Harvard Business Review. And she teaches a couple of things. So one, she has a book, which you can Google. It's something around standing out and having a personal brand. She has a course about the personal brand, but she also has a separate course how to be published in these reputable magazines like Harvard Business Review specifically, and a few other like Wall Street Journal, and in particular how to do it if you kind of are not a celebrity and if you don't have PR doing that. So I think the way she described it to me in a nutshell, when she started doing it, she also went through various audiences, and her key priority was to get the big logos within certain groups. So for example, she could evidence that she's done press with the main magazines, I don't know, like Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review. So she put the logos in that way. She's done television with certain brands, let's say, for example, BBC, it may have been something else. And then she has spoken in certain universities, like big universities. But my experience and her experience is to get to all those universities and television and everything else, in a way, it's the same as building a CV. So for example, when I started doing podcasts, nobody wanted to put me on a 0.5 watch podcast. I had to go through the podcasts that nobody has listened to the podcasts which are 10% rated, to 5% rated, 3%, 1%, 0.5%, because in a way you are trying to evidence how you went from the smaller to the bigger ones. It's the same with television. So BBC doesn't want to listen to you unless you've been on smaller television, typically. So you kind of, again, need to say, because once you pitch, they want to demonstrate that you've done some television, like local television, and then you kind of need to build throughout the other items, right? So for example, BBC could say, oh, we want you to be on some ITV before you can get on BBC. If it's more, I guess, not a random comment, but something which is more repeatable, I guess, if you are an expert in technology space. It's the same with the conferences, because they all in a way want to see that you have spoken somewhere. And I guess as you start doing it, the best way, if somebody from the network can introduce you somewhere, that would be much more faster and easier than going through this whole pitching process. I mean, with the podcasts, what I used to do, there is a library where you can see the names of people, so you just keep pitching to them. If it's media, like Business Insider, which is more a magazine, I guess, you again kind of pitch to them. And there are courses how to be on television and how to pitch when you are not a celebrity. So, but it's a lot around tenacity, and it's a lot around having a bit of a hook in terms of why not you want to speak on television, but why this is important to the audience who's going to listen to you. Because ultimately the reporter, the television, or the conference just care about their audience and keeping them happy.
Just put some good links in there for people to look at in terms of guides and marketing. Dele has asked, I see you don't have book an appointment on your LinkedIn status. Do you take on online mentors at all?
Potentially, but I'm now doing paid work. So if you're willing to pay, I'm happy to do it. I don't have that link because I'm advertising my TED Talk because it's still growing and I can only put one link. But I think I need to think maybe I should have a book appointment at some point. I'm trying to build my website separately, which is actually also for the personal brand. I just wanted to share, there is one lady who used to be a senior partner in Accenture. So she was a level 2 partner. So level 1 is kind of the country head of Accenture, and level 2 are people under. And she also used to be a senior partner in IBM. So she has a very good personal brand and career as well. She has been doing all this speaking apparently for the last 24 years. I think she's now 48 to my knowledge. And she managed to have her job, which is a corporate job in Accenture, for example. She managed in the contract with them to agree that she can still get paid for the public speaking, which she does in her free time, and for the processes from her like books and other things. So my understanding is while she gets a salary and all the stuff through the company, she manages to generate like 6-figure number from her public speaking and everything else. But it obviously took her some time to build it. What I was very surprised is I haven't yet seen a person in the industry who managed to build it in the contract that you can get the proceeds by also being in the corporate. Which is also kind of paying you substantial amount of money.
It's very rare that happens.
Yeah. But I think what her story is in IBM in particular, she would always clarify with IBM, do they want her to speak as a personal person, or do they want her to speak on behalf of IBM, even if it was perhaps a similar topic. I think that there was also a lady, she's Sarah, I forget her surname, but she's in Microsoft and she's a senior advisor in cybersecurity. I know that she does it in Microsoft and she does it personally, and she can get the money from her personal opportunities as well.
So here, you've got your hand up. Oh, you've taken it down now. We've run out of questions. So do you have any more gems that you would like to share with us?
Well, I think it's just a question of what you guys may be interested in, right? Because the principle is there are 3 mechanisms to do it. Number 1 is ideally the company will pitch for you and then you will talk to the points of the company. The challenge then becomes is once you leave that company, the question is, will people listen to you because you were part of that company or because you are a particular person outside of that company, right? So that's the first question. The second option is that you try to do it how I've been doing. I don't think you have to do all this level of tenacity to this level and the time commitment. I think the reason I was doing it this way is because I didn't have anybody who can teach me. And frankly speaking, I didn't know anybody who exists with this particular angle around the people who I've seen. I have seen that some people, they undertake, I guess, the work in terms of pitching for you. which may be PR or maybe something more creative when they try to introduce you to their contacts. But what I found is the PR people I personally saw don't have relationships in the technology space. So it becomes a little bit more on D&I they can do, on women, maybe on diversities they can do, but I haven't yet found those who are really good in tech space, and I'm yet to find them. And once I find them, I can share. I have also seen that if you do a good, talk or whatever it is, engagement, the organizers always want to invite you back. So typically they have several opportunities throughout the year or several years. So you kind of have an opportunity to go back if you want to. I have also thought about LinkedIn in particular. So I've been studying on LinkedIn what sort of performs well and versus what performs less. My understanding after speaking to LinkedIn is they would like to see more videos, and they want to have those shorter videos within like 30 seconds or 1 minute, which they think is something which they're really pushing to the market. They're looking for things like, I guess, how to advance in your career or something nice and sweet and short, which is in a way a version of Instagram story, I believe, because it used to be 30 seconds. But obviously something more on the technology side. In our case, perhaps more on technology side. I think the other things which I have observed, it has been more difficult for me personally, because I'm trying to unite, fail, but never give up through the technology, and then through kind of more people side. So in a way, people get confused. Am I a technology expert or am I a motivational person, I guess? So that has been a little bit challenging for me, but I want to keep it that way. So I tend to ration-wise do 2 things about tech and 2 things about something more personal. And then maybe ideally 1 video when I start doing more videos. I think that the experience I've had with LinkedIn is many of the cases people are upset with what the companies are posting, not just because it's less personable. So for example, something which we've been doing in the last 2 companies, we've been using Bamboo and I think some other company that allows you to just take for example, my content and keep republishing it. But what people found is that it's less personable. So for example, in my past company, we used to do a lot of research and a lot of like, here is our report, and then it's like a 10-page report, and nobody really reads a 10-page report. So I think what I've been learning is the sweeter and shorter and nicer it is, the better. And there should always be like a call of action towards the end, I guess. And ideally, when you look at LinkedIn, because when it flows through the story, you only have the top part, which people see, so they don't actually see the text. So I guess similar to TED Talks or to any media, there needs to be some sort of a hook in the start so that people want to read it if it's more text. I think people are moving more to videos. So for example, I was in a conference last week. They were saying that the average span of attention of the younger generation is less than 45 seconds. And this is one of the reasons why people are just doing Instagram and TikTok, and they're no longer used to do reading and stuff. So they would like to see more videos, or they want to see something which is more like eye-catching, because they find it very difficult to figure out the text, unless it's their topic, I guess. Something which I've seen discussed in the industry, some people were saying, and it's just a hypothesis, that in future, people will stop reading books, so perhaps they'll be reading less books. So I've been having a chat with Wikipedia, for example, which is a lot of text, whether they plan to do videos to summarize their kind of content. And Wikipedia don't plan to do it, but I think many of the people are becoming more visual. There has been a lot of thought from the marketing perspective, how to use AI for marketing. So how can you create these videos, or how you could create, I don't know, more exciting pictures. And there are some tools. I think one is called Dale. I haven't personally used it, but it does some creative imaging, which can be used for slides, for example. I would also probably say that what I was taught for LinkedIn, I was taught to say I instead of we, because it's kind of my personal opinion and not the opinion of the company, but also because even with the CEO, they tried saying, I have, I don't know, visited these countries and this is what I believe are the values of the company, etc., etc. I have also learned that it's always good, and I'm becoming better in it, it's always good when you comment on other people's posts as well, instead of just writing your content. And the rationale for it is obviously people like when people kind of show attention, but also they like that it's not just them liking your posts. I think the way LinkedIn works is they like the engagement. So what they call by engagement is not just putting the content, but replying to the comments and kind of trying to write to other people organically, ideally. I guess my thinking with LinkedIn has so far been that I do manage to message people when I want to talk to them, and typically they do reply, which is helpful from the personal brand. I don't think I had this amount of uptake when nobody knew about me. I think it does help these days. I do think that anybody who does conferences, they do check out your LinkedIn profile and they do check out either examples of where you spoke or anything that you are sort of writing. So I know that they keep checking out, I mean, if you have videos or something. I know that for all the conferences, unless they know you, if it's like a very cold pitch, ideally you want to have something which shows how you talk. So for example, for television, there is a TV reel. For speaking, there is a speaker reel. I don't have a speaker reel. I don't have a TV reel, but I know that people do it. And I think that the last item, I understand that many people write books. I understand that those books are not really always commercially successful, but they want to write books for the purpose of having an opportunity to be doing speaking on the back of the book and having something which they stand for, which they have, I guess, thought about and put into a book. Sorry, there was another question about Wikipedia, but I can't see it.
No, there are no more questions there. More comments where you can learn about public speaking and other things on Wikipedia, and about the fact that people are, I've noticed in the last few months there's a lot more LinkedIn shorts which weren't there 6 months ago.
Yeah, so I think what LinkedIn has done, there used to be LinkedIn Accelerator, which happened last year, but they've only done it once. I understand that they specifically taught the creators of what they need to do. I wasn't part of that, and whoever I've spoken to wasn't able to share with me all the knowledge from there. My understanding is that hashtags right now don't seem to play such an important role. My understanding is the sweeter, shorter, and more exciting the narrative is, the better. I personally find that when I post on something more personal, I have much more views and impressions. When I talk about pure technology, I have less impressions unless I've been on television or I have a nice picture. So I have been trying much more, as much as possible, to talk about technology in a more simple language. The easier, the better. And I think I'm getting better in it. I just had a class with somebody who teaches how to be on television. And I think what they're saying is the main thing for the press or the podcasts or anything else is to be able to concisely say your thought so that when they cut it or when they want to quote it, there is something which is 15 seconds or 30 seconds, which they can put and use, in particular on television. Because what people don't like, they don't want a narrative which just never ends, and they want you, even when you answer the question, to answer it to the point, shorter and more concise. So I think if there are certain topics you are interested in, I would probably encourage you to think of the key messages, what they are, and kind of how you put it to their audience. I generally find that the whole mindset with the conferences is you should always think about who you are talking to, and you should try to make it a little bit more entertaining where possible. Because most of the conferences I go to, they are very, very similar to each other. They have a lot of men, they don't have women. They may have one woman on the panel, who's typically me on my panel, but there are other women on the other panels who I have observed. I think that there is a big push for diversity, but I think that there is still more to be done. And I do think that in one of the conferences I've been is, they were so desperate for women, they flew a woman from Armenia to talk about technology, which I was really impressed about. So I think that there is always an opportunity to speak and to be heard. But I think ideally it would be nice, even if it's this group, if you guys are interested or broader, just to share either the people who we know collectively or kind of try to take the message collectively, because it's going to be easier than just, the story which I had to do in terms of pitching to everybody else, because it's very time consuming and a lot of rejections.
Yeah, you've got to have some resilience.
Well, today I was speaking to somebody, I was asking them what makes a successful presenter, journalist, or a person who's kind of in the media space. And they said that it's not the looks, it's kind of the tenacity. But they do say that from the media perspective, they ideally want to have somebody looking a little bit different from the masses of people who they have. And kind of most of the conferences or dinners or events I go, they have a very specific type of speakers who are usually, as I said, men who are much more older than me in many cases. So I guess and you guys as well, will be very different from the typical audience.
So I think that's all our questions, Alina. So
yeah,
thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I can do a more detailed dive down, but I think it would require more like, this is how you pitch, or this is how you write, or how you do the hook. And I guess it will be kind of more specific to the topic.
Yeah,
of the conversation.
some useful tips there and hopefully people realizing that it's not an easy thing to build your personal brand. It takes time and a lot of effort, and be prepared for rejections.
I mean, my personal ambition is that if I develop, or if you guys develop a personal brand, that the company really values it. So I guess in my case, instead of doing PowerPoints, I'll be doing more television. And then hopefully we can transform how the company works as well. I've seen some companies seem to be interested in this, but it's still not the mindset of the large industries, because I think what they're thinking is we need to have a very senior person talk, rather than kind of more junior people, middle management, which I hope is going to change, because obviously to talk to diverse audiences and to attract diverse audiences, you need to show the diverse spokespeople, anyone who's willing to show up.